Imagine a mind so powerful that it can literally see the invisible mathematical scaffolding of human behavior.
Yeah, a mind that can just look at absolute chaos and, instantly map out the underlying order.
Right. But what happens when that exact same mind is so relentlessly wired to find patterns that it begins constructing, well, terrifying alternate realities that simply don't exist?
I mean, it is the ultimate double-edged sword. You have this incredible high-powered lens that brings the deepest structures of reality into sharp focus.
Oh, yeah.
But that same lens can fracture, right? And it threatens to destroy the person looking through it.
Exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're joining us. Today, we are looking at a remarkably comprehensive set of sources anchored by the incredibly detailed Wikipedia biography of John Forbes Nash Jr.
And, our mission for this deep dive is to go far beyond the Hollywood narrative you might know from the movie A Beautiful Mind.
Right, because that movie...
Yeah, the cinematic happily ever after just glosses over so much. We really want to uncover the actual infinitely complex man behind the myth.
Absolutely.
This is a story about a mathematician whose breakthroughs literally govern our modern world today. But his personal journey was far darker and ultimately far more triumphant than fiction.
Exactly. But before we can understand how his mind broke, we really have to understand how it was built.
Right.
So Nash was born in 1928 in Bluefield, West Virginia. And it's funny, he wasn't immediately pegged as this once-in-a-generation mathematical prodigy.
Yeah, he wasn't like a child star doing calculus at age 4.
No, exactly. He was just a really smart, curious kid. He was absorbing everything he could from the books his parents and grandparents gave him. I mean, his dad was an electrical engineer and his mom was a former school teacher.
So a very academic household.
Very. And when he eventually landed a full scholarship to the Carnegie Institute of Technology, which, we now know as Carnegie Mellon, he actually started out studying chemical engineering.
Which didn't stick at all.
Yeah, not at all.
He switched to chemistry, and then finally, after a professor named John Lightensinge noticed his raw analytical ability, he pivoted to mathematics.
Right.
It's just a great reminder that genius rarely travels in a straight line, Often, true visionaries have to bounce around, testing different frameworks before they find the exact right discipline for their brain.
Yeah, once Nash found math, he accelerated. By the time he graduated in 1948, he had earned his bachelor's and his master's degrees simultaneously.
That's just wild.
It is. And the speed of his mind at that point is perfectly captured by his graduate school application process.
Oh, I love this story.
Right? So when Nash was applying for his doctorate, his advisor, Richard Duffin, wrote a letter of recommendation to Princeton University. Now, you've probably asked for or written recommendation letters in your own career, right?
Yeah, they're usually these dense, multi-page documents.
Exactly, full of glowing adjectives and long anecdotes. But Duffin's letter for Nash was exactly one sentence long.
Just one sentence.
One sentence. It simply read, "He is a mathematical genius."
I mean, it is the ultimate academic mic drop. And of course it worked. He was accepted practically everywhere, Harvard, Chicago, Michigan. But he chose Princeton.
And the reasoning is so interesting.
Yeah, it tells you a lot about Nash's practical side at the time. He chose Princeton because they offered him a better fellowship with more money, and, well, it was geographically closer to his family in West Virginia.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because what he produced at Princeton fundamentally altered the course of human knowledge.
It really did.
In 1950, Nash wrote his PhD dissertation under his advisor Albert W. Tucker. And the entire document was only 28 pages long.
Just 28 pages. That's practically a pamphlet in academia.
Think about that. A 28-page paper by a 21-year-old graduate student that contains the definition of what we now universally call the Nash equilibrium. Now, to really grasp why this matters to you and me today, we have to look at how he understood non-cooperative games. Imagine you are driving on a highway in incredibly heavy stop-and-go traffic, and two lanes are merging into one.
Ugh, a highly stressful scenario, but a perfect analogy.
Right. In this traffic jam, everyone is entirely out for themselves. It is pure, unadulterated self-interest. You want to get ahead. The driver in the SUV next to you wants to get ahead. No one is explicitly coordinating or, holding hands.
Definitely not holding hands.
Exactly. But eventually, a stable outcome is reached, the zipper merge. One car goes, then the next car goes. A Nash equilibrium is a situation where no player can gain an advantage by changing their own strategy, assuming the other players keep their strategies unchanged.
So nobody budges from the pattern.
Right. It's like a classic Mexican standoff in an old Western movie. Nobody pulls the trigger. Because if you do...
Because if you do, everyone dies.
Exactly. You've reached a stable, albeit incredibly tense, state based entirely on mutual self-interest.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that 28-page paper literally shattered the existing paradigms in the field of economics.
How so?
Well, before John Nash, classical economic theory often relied on models that assumed either perfect cooperation or perfect competition. But Nash proved mathematically how absolute stability can emerge from pure selfishness.
Wow.
Yeah. He provided the mathematical proof for how humans actually behave. This single concept became the bedrock of modern game theory. And, I mean, it is the exact work that would eventually win him the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences 44 years later in 1994.
I mean, for almost anyone else on Earth, you write a 28-page paper in your 20s, it guarantees you a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
You declare victory.
Yeah, you retire to a beach.
You coast. But Nash's mind wasn't built for coasting. The ink on that dissertation barely dried before he was actively seeking out the most impossible, unsolvable problems he could find.
He really was.
He moved to MIT and shifted his focus entirely, diving into real algebraic geometry and differential geometry.
And this is where we really start to see the unique architecture of his brain. He learned about a massive open conjecture in differential geometry from a colleague.
Okay.
And the problem asked this seemingly impossible question. It was, can any Riemannian manifold be isometrically embedded into a Euclidean space?
Wait, I have to jump in and synthesize this, because when I was reading the sources, my brain kind of melted here.
It's dense stuff.
It is. He is basically proving that complex, highly warped geometric shapes can exist inside completely flat dimensions without fundamentally altering their geometry, right?
Exactly.
Is this mathematical bridging why engineers today can accurately model incredibly chaotic real-world physics inside a standard flat computer program?
You've hit the nail exactly on the head. To break it down, think of a Riemannian manifold as a shape with intense intrinsic curvature, like a wildly crumpled up piece of paper.
Okay, got it.
And Euclidean space is standard, flat, rule-abiding geometry, like the surface of your desk. Nash proved mathematically that you can place that infinitely complex, curved shape into a standard flat space without tearing it, stretching it, or breaking its internal rules.
That's unbelievable.
It is. The logic he invented to solve this abstract puzzle gave us the mathematical tools to understand turbulent fluid dynamics, specifically the Euler equations.
So it has real-world applications.
Oh, massive ones. Today, when aerospace engineers simulate how air violently flows over a jet wing or how ocean currents churn, they rely on the descendants of Nash's geometry.
But, you know, how he solved it is the craziest part to me. The sources detail this massive roadblock called the loss of regularity.
Right, that was the big hurdle.
Basically, the normal rules of math kept breaking down.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to mathematically iron out that crumpled piece of paper, but every time you press down on one crease, an infinite number of microscopic new wrinkles appear.
Yeah, normal equations just shatter at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Nash invented a radically new technique. He injected extra regularity via a differential equation that recursively smoothed out the math. Step by step, it ironed out the infinite wrinkles until the equation stabilized.
And it was a technique so bizarre and unprecedented that it birthed an entirely new concept called the Nash-Moser theorem.
Wow.
There is an incredible quote in our sources from the renowned mathematician Michael Gromov about this specific breakthrough. Gromov said, "You must be a novice in analysis or a genius like Nash to believe anything like that can be ever true."
Oh, that's amazing.
Nash looked at a brick wall that the greatest mathematical minds had accepted for decades, and he simply walked right through it.
And he didn't stop there. He tackled elliptic partial differential equations next, which led to the DiGiorgi-Nash theorem.
Right.
And this actually solved Hilbert's 19th problem, a puzzle that had sat famously unsolved for nearly 60 years.
Yeah, just sitting there mocking mathematicians.
Exactly. But here is the agonizing part. An Italian mathematician named Ennio DiGiorgi discovered this solution at the exact same time using completely different methods.
What are the odds?
I know. Because it was a simultaneous discovery, Nash just narrowly missed out on winning the prestigious Fields Medal in 1958. Archival voting records show he placed third.
Which honestly was a massive blow to him. He wasn't just solving these problems for the love of math, he was racing to be objectively recognized as the greatest mind of his generation.
He had a massive ego about it.
Absolutely. But that same obsession with unbreakable mathematical structures was driving him to look beyond abstract geometry. He was secretly looking at the future of national security.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm.
In 2011, the National Security Agency, the NSA, declassified a series of letters that John Nash had written to them all the way back in the 1950s.
This part blew my mind.
Right. In these letters, he was proposing a brand new encryption-decryption machine. Decades before the modern computer era, before anyone was even thinking about this, he anticipated modern cryptography based on a concept called computational hardness.
Exactly. I mean, before Nash, codes were mostly about clever hiding or complex substitution. Like, if you found the cipher, you could read the message.
Just like a decoder ring.
Right. But Nash realized that true security lay in math that was easy to compute in one direction, but functionally impossible to reverse without a specific key.
So think of it like multiplying two massive prime numbers together. If I give you the two primes, it's easy to find the answer. But if I only give you the massive resulting number and ask you to figure out which two prime numbers created it,
It's nearly impossible.
yeah, without the key, it would take a supercomputer millions of years to guess it. Nash basically invented the foundational logic of modern secure encryption and complex digital passwords.
Yeah, he saw the architecture of the digital internet age while the rest of the world was still dialing rotary phones and using punch cards. It's almost prophetic.
It really is. But this brings us to the fracture. The very mechanism that made Nash a genius, his relentless, obsessive drive to connect the dots and find hidden patterns in the universe, began to redline.
Right.
The engine started finding patterns that simply weren't there. And it's crucial here to look at the historical reality versus the sanitized Hollywood narrative we've been handed.
Right, because the reality was incredibly messy and it carried a heavy human toll. For instance, in the early 1950s, while at MIT, Nash had a relationship with a nurse named Eleanor Stier.
Yes, and they had a son together.
They did. But when she told him she was pregnant, he left her, citing their different social statuses. The movie completely omits this.
It paints a much more complicated picture of his character.
It really does. Furthermore, he lost his top-secret security clearance and his highly lucrative consulting job at the Rand Corporation in 1954.
And that was a huge deal back then.
Huge. Why? Because he was arrested in Santa Monica for indecent exposure in a police sting operation targeting gay men.
The charges were ultimately dropped. But the fallout and the paranoid McCarthy-era climate was immediate and devastating to his career.
And the true, undeniable mental break became evident in 1959. By this point, he had married Alicia, who was a brilliant MIT physics graduate, and she was pregnant with their son.
Right.
Nash began exhibiting severe, escalating paranoia. He started believing that all men who wore red ties were part of a massive crypto-communist party conspiring against him.
And his actions became increasingly erratic. He started drafting and mailing letters to foreign embassies in Washington, D.C., claiming he was establishing a new global government.
It's just heartbreaking.
It is. He genuinely believed he was in line to inherit the throne of a frozen continent. I mean, he was signing his letters, John Nash, Emperor of Antarctica. He also began referring to himself in the third person as Johann von Nassau.
And the definitive professional breaking point occurred during a highly anticipated lecture he gave at Columbia University for the American Mathematical Society.
Oh, this story is tough.
It really is. He was supposed to present a proof of the Riemann hypothesis, which is essentially one of the holy grails of theoretical mathematics.
Right.
But instead, the lecture he delivered was completely incoherent. His colleagues in the audience listened in stunned silence. They immediately realized that one of the greatest minds of their time was profoundly unwell.
In April 1959, he was involuntarily committed to McLean Hospital. He was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And over the next decade, his life became a harrowing cycle of psychiatric hospitals, including the New Jersey State Hospital at Trenton.
Yeah, that was a dark period.
He was subjected to the harsh treatments of the era, receiving powerful antipsychotic medications, and even enduring insulin shock therapy.
What's fascinating here is Nash's own profound, deeply poignant self-awareness regarding his illness, especially when he reflected on it in his later years.
Yeah, he was surprisingly objective about it later.
He was. He specifically dated his mental disturbances to early 1959, describing it as a distinct shift from scientific rationality to delusional thinking. But he never viewed his illness as an entirely separate entity from his genius.
No, he didn't.
He famously stated, "I wouldn't have had good scientific ideas if I'd thought more normally."
That quote just stops you in your tracks. He completely recognized that the exact same wiring that allowed him to see the Nash equilibrium, or the mathematical truth of the embedding theorems, was the exact same wiring that made him see crypto-communist plots in a red tie.
Exactly. It was all the same machine.
Yeah, he felt that if he was completely pressureless, if his mind didn't run at that terrifying frequency, he just wouldn't have produced the work that changed the world.
And, most stories of severe schizophrenia from that specific historical era ended tragically in permanent institutionalization.
Yes, very often.
The treatments were brutal, and the medical understanding of the disease was severely limited. But Nash's mind executed a remarkable, agonizingly slow reboot. And again, we have to correct the historical record that Hollywood altered.
Yes. The movie heavily implies that he managed his illness in his later years by taking newer, better medications.
Right, the tidy movie ending.
Exactly. But the historical sources are very clear on this. Nash stopped taking all psychiatric medication after 1970.
Wow.
Instead, he achieved a state he called enforced rationality. He began to consciously, intellectually reject his delusions. He literally decided that his politically oriented, paranoid thinking was a hopeless waste of intellectual effort.
We really need to pause and appreciate the sheer, incomprehensible willpower that requires.
It's hard to even fathom.
He essentially treated his own schizophrenia as a mathematical error that he had to consciously fact-check every single day.
Wow. Yeah.
Imagine walking down the street, seeing a man in a red tie, feeling the absolute biological terror of the fight-or-flight response kicking in, and having to use your intellect to manually override your own brain.
To just tell yourself, no, that pattern is false.
Exactly. It must have been utterly exhausting.
During this period in the 1970s, he became known as the Phantom of Fine Hall at Princeton. He was this quiet, shadowy figure who would wander the mathematics center in the middle of the night, scribbling arcane, massive equations on the blackboards.
But to Princeton's credit, the community protected him.
They really did.
They allowed him to audit classes, they accepted his eccentricities, and they gave him a safe, intellectually stimulating space to exist while his mind slowly healed.
And a massive part of that stability came from Alicia. The immense stress of his illness had led them to divorce in 1963, but after his final hospital discharge in 1970, she actually took him in.
Right, she was incredible.
Yeah, she really was. He lived in her house as a boarder. She maintained a quiet, highly structured life for him, shielding him from stress, which she firmly credited for his gradual recovery. And they actually resumed their relationship years later and remarried in 2001.
And as his mind finally cleared in the late 1980s and 90s, the outside academic world slowly realized he was still alive and, lucid.
Which sets the stage for the 1994 Nobel Prize.
Yes.
Nash hadn't published significant new work in decades, and the Nobel Committee was reportedly very hesitant to award the prize to someone with a well-documented history of severe mental illness. They were worried about his unpredictability.
Sure, from a PR perspective.
Exactly. But an incredibly dedicated group of his colleagues mounted a fierce behind-the-scenes campaign. They used early internet email systems to coordinate, constantly vouching for his current mental fitness to secure him the award he had earned over 40 years prior.
So well-deserved.
So what does this all mean for his later years? Because he didn't just fade into retirement after winning the Nobel. He continued to work, continuing to select his own highly unique intellectual paths. He spent years developing a concept he called ideal money.
Yes, ideal money was his proposal for a global currency system that couldn't be manipulated.
Interesting.
He argued that money should be pegged to an industrial consumption price index, basically a basket of essential global commodities. And to understand the why behind this, Nash wanted to entirely remove human emotional bias, political pressure, and central bank manipulation from the concept of inflation.
Because humans are irrational.
Exactly. He was looking for the ultimate mathematically stable state for global currency.
And our sources note that his later economic thinking was highly critical of Keynesian economics, which generally advocates for active government intervention and top-down management of the economy. Nash himself noted that his views on money and the function of monetary authority paralleled those of the economist Friedrich Hayek, who favored decentralized, market-driven stability. Now, just to be clear for you listening, We aren't taking a stance on monetary policy here. We are strictly just reporting his views as stated in the sources. But it perfectly highlights how his mind never stopped probing for structural stability.
Right, he was always looking for systems that couldn't be corrupted by irrational human behavior.
Exactly.
He even applied that unique perspective to mental illness itself. Later in life, he's suggested some highly provocative hypotheses from an evolutionary psychology standpoint.
Oh, this was fascinating to read.
Yeah, he compared being insane or not fitting into a standard social function to a worker going on strike from an economic point of view.
A biological strike.
Yes. He questioned if what society blindly labels as madness might sometimes be a biological strike against an unhealthy environment. He was looking for the hidden utility in non-standard behaviors.
Which perfectly encapsulates his relentless independence.
Yeah.
Even in his twilight years, John Nash fundamentally refused to conform to standard expectations, whether in mathematics, in economics, or in psychology.
He lived his entire life exactly on his own terms.
Which is what makes the end of his story so deeply poignant. On May 19th, 2015, he was awarded the Abel Prize in Norway, which is essentially the Nobel Prize of pure mathematics, specifically honoring his early work on partial differential equations.
It was the ultimate validation of his life's work.
It really was.
But just a few days later, on May 23, he and Alicia were taking a taxi home from the Newark airport after flying back to the States.
Yeah.
The driver lost control on the New Jersey Turnpike and violently struck a guardrail. Neither John nor Alicia were wearing seatbelts. They were both ejected from the vehicle and killed instantly. He was 86 years old.
It was just a shocking, incredibly abrupt end to a life that had survived so many terrifying internal storms. When you step back and look at the entirety of the sources we've unpacked today, John Nash's legacy is profoundly dual.
Yes, very much so.
On one hand, you have this beautiful, immutable math that literally structures the invisible world around us. I mean, if you just logged in with a secure password, if you rely on global economic stability, if you fly in a plane modeled with advanced fluid dynamics, you are living, right now, in a world built in part by John Nash.
And on the other hand, you have the deeply human, tragic, yet awe-inspiring story of a mind breaking under the weight of its own genius.
Yeah.
And then painstakingly rebuilding itself through sheer force of will and the grace of a fiercely protective community.
Exactly. And it leaves you with this incredible tension. If Nash himself admitted that he wouldn't have had good scientific ideas if he had thought normally, it forces you to ask a really difficult question.
With that.
Well, how much of human progress fundamentally relies on minds that operate perilously close to the edge of madness?
Oh, it's a staggering thought experiment. Imagine if we possessed a magic wand tomorrow that could instantly cure all non-standard thinking. If we could magically make everyone process the world in a perfectly safe, normal, well-adjusted way, what future discoveries would we inadvertently erase from existence?
What hidden structures of reality would remain forever invisible to us simply because no one was obsessive enough or different enough to see the patterns? It brings us right back to the beginning. We absolutely need those high-powered lenses, even knowing the terrible risk that they might shatter.
So true.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about your day, keep questioning the patterns around you, and we'll see you next time.